coalition building and partnerships. An institution such as Oberlin with so many talented students, and allow them to partner with the community, amazing things happen. So we are currently working with the Illinois Institute of Technology. We purchased 27 acres of land about 10 years ago, 5 of which will be an urban farm. We're planning to do a green from the ground up community. It's one of the first times that a faith community is attempting a $126 million investment on the south side of Chicago. We'll have housing, entrepreneurship, a food hub, non-traditional athletics. There'll be no football or basketball. There'll be a lot of track and volleyball, soccer, lacrosse, whatever you want to get to Oberlin. And also the largest urban farm in Chicago of 5 acres, right next to what is called the West Pullman area. But it was the students at the Illinois Institute of Technology who took the framework. What about a food hub? Well, you want to conserve energy on your athletic facility. Instead of going up, go down, and then put a green roof on top. Then you have additional acreage to grow food for the community. Why don't you put a food hub here that then is a transportation hub for the south side? So they came up with some amazing ideas because they were released into the community.
What salience do opportunities in the clean energy economy factor in the current election campaign?
We are on hundreds of college campuses, and we're doing a big online program specifically to people under the age of 30. It is partly to talk about them, to make sure they understand where the candidates stand on the issue. We would go with environmental justice, that in the United States of America, whether you get to breathe clean air and drink clean water is very dependent on who you are and where you live and how rich you are. So if you think about Flint, Michigan,
Right.
there are a lot of Flint, Michigans in California. We have 3.3 million people with asthma. They're overwhelmingly working class people of color. That's where people put the plants, that's where people put the roads with the big diesel trucks.
We're going to have to change the way that we talk about environmentalism and how we build our coalitions. If you talk to people who fish and hunt, they do want clean water to be able to fish. They do want protected land so that they can hunt. That there is a way to build a coalition with people we traditionally feel will not be a part of this coalition. The idea that we are still having conversations, that it is actually allowed to be brought up on television with no one, chastising you for saying that, I disagree with climate change. That's got to be one of the foolish things I've ever heard in my life. The fact that we have the information, we know what is happening, and climate change, I put it in a form of genocide. We're talking about the cultural genocide of people who live on coasts and islands across the world, and not let pundits frame how we talk about the planet. There has to be strong coalition on the left to ensure that there is moral language that is raised in all policy discussions. This is what the political community is missing. We need to talk about human worth and human dignity. We need to talk about our planet in moral language to ensure, I don't know, maybe somebody else is flying to Mars. I'm not. So I want to make sure that where I live, the air that I breathe, and that I am preparing a planet that will be cared for a generation that has not yet been born. That's my gift to my yet-to-be-born grandchildren, that they have space to be able to grow, play, imagine, and be creative.
What we have seen in Washington, D.C. is legislative dysfunction, and we've seen it consistently. So we're going to have a new president who is going to have a Congress which, with a high degree of probability, is going to be unwilling or unable to confront some of, or most of, or all of our most important issues. And we'll end our dysfunction faster in Congress when the American people see the world in the 21st century as we have ideas from the 1930s and ideas from the 1980s. We're in a different century. It's time for us to see a brighter future, and when people can see that, they'll fight for it.
Role of regenerative agriculture in solving the climate crisis.
So we tend to think about climate strictly in terms of industry, heating, and transportation. But we don't see it in terms of the greenhouse gases created by agriculture or the possibility of sequestering carbon through agriculture. The way that we raise crops, raise animals, how we treat the land is both something that creates a lot of our greenhouse gases and can also solve a lot of our problems. The amount of carbon in the soil in the United States is a fraction of what it was when Europeans first arrived here. We can put carbon back into the soil and completely change the arithmetic with different grazing patterns. We are going to have to find ways that are not less painful, that are not neutral. We're going to have to figure out ways to be positive in this. And this is one of the ways where we have the most possibility, and for our sins, my wife and I are trying to figure out part of that out in California.
To Reverend Moss, do you work with Habitat for Humanity in your rehabilitation? When I was a supervisor at our prisons, east of down here in Grafton, we had small community service groups that went out into the community. They worked with Habitat, and when they were released, they basically had made a transition and were able to work themselves right back into the Cleveland economy.
Yes, we do. We do have a relationship with Habitat for Humanity. Work with them. They do tremendous work, and we're glad to have that coalition.
I'm Nicole, and I go to Lorraine Community College, and I'm in their Sustainable Agriculture program, a program that a year ago I didn't know existed, but has been an amazing opportunity to work hands-on, learning information that I want to study about permaculture and the future of farming and how to farm sustainably for our future. In Chicago and around the different places that you guys have seen, if there are more technical, 2-year, practical kinds of programs that kind of go along with this high-level college and people coming out of the criminal cycle back into society. But I was wondering if you've seen a lot of these technical types of programs.
That's a great question. Chicago is slowly moving in that direction. Chicago is an industrial city, the city with big shoulders, as Salvello stated. We are still trying to move in the direction of recognizing that there is not just the 1920s economy, which Chicago was built on, and we're attempting to move into the 21st century in terms of its structure and development.
Let's go about progressive agricultural programs with a climate focus. There are some really terrific ones, including one in Wisconsin, which is run by a woman named Molly Johns, which is absolutely fantastic. But there is a community of people who are looking at these problems very directly, and they're hooked up with some of the big agricultural companies, but a lot of the best thinking is being done in universities around the United States.
My name's Matt Roberts. NextGen's obviously a politically focused organization, and I'm curious, post-election, what NextGen Climate's moves are.
So the real question that we're going to ask on November 9th is, how can we actually get an effective reaction to our climate challenge? Because at some point, a lot of times in politics, the question is, how can we elect people from our party? And it seems people expect kind of a reversion to the mean, so it's kind of a push and pull and it goes back and forth. That's not going to work for us. We actually need to attack this problem, and I think that's true of the number of justice-related issues. We can't afford to wait until we have a lay-down hand with a group of progressive politicians. No, I promise we will be going as hard on November 9th as we're going on November 8th.
We've heard you speak about coalition building. We've heard you speak about environmental and social justice. You're back on this stage in 10 years. It's 2027. How do you define success for yourselves and your movements 10 years from now?
Cutting the mass incarceration population by 50%. Increasing housing in underserved communities by 60%. A reduction in Chicago's gun-related violence by another 50%. The other piece would be, in Chicago, we have one of the largest urban solar farms. But it does not power any of the houses in the area where it's located. They send the power all the way to another city, then they send the power back to the houses. And so we're in negotiation with the ComEd that provides the infrastructure for the power to create urban solar hubs, where you take 12 houses. You put those 12 houses together, they're solar panels, and they become a cluster. But they also become a cluster where they get to vote on who will be the subcontractor to install everything in that community. And that then places community control as we start talking about the green economy. But you now have an opportunity to educate an entire new generation of young people who will get degrees in environmentalism or in different technical degrees in engineering. Open this area up, not just for a walkthrough tour, but to share how you can go into a particular career. In 10 years from now, I hope that the south side of Chicago will be known for that. There is great work happening in Chicago beyond what you hear on the headlines.
And I think back to the other great challenges that my parents or I've observed, and let me just choose two huge national challenges for the United States, which would be World War II and the Civil Rights Movement. So I remember going to northern Minnesota with my parents, and my father was 22 in 1941. So all of his friends were of an age to have participated in World War II, and when they met each other, they always asked each other what they'd done. And there was an implicit statement that something important had to happen, and you had to have participated in a meaningful way. One of my best friends is a guy from Orange, New Jersey, who's African American. He told me that during the Civil Rights Movement, everybody checked everybody else. Are you showing up? Are you doing the work? Are you standing out for what's right? So to me, in 10 years, success will be when you meet your best friends, you just check to see if they were part of the movement. Did they stand up for justice in the United States? So we can all contribute in this movement in our own ways. And if we do, that will be success for us because we will make it happen.
Charles Peterson, Associate Professor of Africana Studies here at Oberlin College. Local politics, state-level politics are where technology, culture, class, race, and economics all sort of mash together. Our panel is called Going Local. Looking at sort of politics in Detroit. Robert Kudner, of course, will be today's speaker. We will have Trevor Crow come up for comments, and then we will open it up for a question and answer. Professor Mark Blecker of politics here at Oberlin College.
Bob is a loyal and active member of the Oberlin class of 1965 for his lifelong quest for a politically viable route to a decent economy and social justice. He has written important, widely read books on market failure and the debt crisis, and he's now hard at work on a new one about the ways that globalization undermines democracy. Bob founded and continues to edit and publish The American Prospect so that fellow public intellectuals can contribute to the same project. We are so fortunate to have with us conservation leader Trammell S. Crow, who for years now has been motivating people to take action for the planet. In 2012, he launched a campaign called Conservation Doesn't Have a Party, mobilizing more than 120,000 people to pledge to make conservation a national priority. He built the world's largest Earth Day exhibition, and this April, he set his sights on an even more audacious goal, a global venture to mobilize the world's 50 biggest companies to save the world's oceans, forests, and climate.
I really feel like I have been in the presence of prophetic voices at this conference. Our leaders are people who combine vision and prophecy and strategic smarts and nobility, and you don't get that very often. To try to better understand this election and the phenomenon of Trump and right-wing populism, I assigned myself an article. You get to do this if you're the editor of the magazine. A review essay of what turned out to be 9 books about right-wing populism. The best of these books was a book by the sociologist and progressive Arlie Hochschild called Strangers in Their Own Land. And Arlie, like many of us, was completely baffled by the fact that so many people are apparently voting against their own economic self-interest. No matter how weird Trump's behavior is, no matter how much he reveals himself to be everything that people hate about predatory billionaires, people are all the more inclined to vote for him. The more hypocritical, the more outlandish, the better. How could that be? So Arlie decided to locate her story in southwest Louisiana, the area around Lake Charles, a town of 75,000 that has been ruined by chemical plants, an area where the outraged locals nonetheless vote for Tea Party candidates who are pledged to abolish the EPA. How could that be? She ends up spending 5 years, 10 extended visits, as a kind of political ethnographer, getting to know and like the locals, to try and get into their deep personal narrative, what makes them tick. And to summarize an elegant, complicated, novelistic book, here's what she finds. People in these parts don't like government, they don't trust government, they've watched close up with the government of Louisiana, one of the most chronically corrupt, has given the oil and chemical industry a free pass. The federal EPA, a little better, but even more remote, seems to care more about protecting obscure species than about protecting their lives. The government is great at extracting taxes, helping people who don't deserve it, adding nuisance regulations. And if the government had been doing its job, their homes and farms would not have been turned into a ruined landscape of toxic waste. The most fervent recruits to the Tea Party, as the journalist Alec McGillis has observed, are not working class, much less underclass. They are dispossessed middle class who don't see either political party serving them. Government promised, it didn't deliver. In the Times, in a story on undecided voters in Florida, a man named Ronaldo Bocos told the reporter, "It doesn't matter, Republican, Democrat, I'm only interested in Medicare and Social Security." Somehow he missed the fact that the Democrats defend these programs and the Republicans don't, but government in general, even democracy in general, has lost legitimacy. And unlike hopeful progressives, Hochschild's Louisiana friends derive their view of government not from what government might be, but what it is in their own experience. One of her interviewees, a man named Harold Moreno, who lives on a ruined bayou with dead cypress trees and poisoned water and toxic fish, puts it just about perfectly. Quote, "The state always seems to come down on the little guy. Take this bayou. If your motorboat leaks a little gas into the water, the warden will write you up. But if companies leak thousands of gallons into it and kill all the life here, the state lets them go. If you shoot an endangered brown pelican, they'll put you in jail. But if a company kills the brown pelican by poisoning the fish he eats, they'll let it go. I think they over-regulate the bottom because it's harder to regulate the top." Well, yeah, that sounds almost like something that Bernie Sanders or Ralph Nader might say, but it leads to an opposite brand of populism, a sense of both resignation and deep resentment, and a feeling that all we can rely on is our own grit. This man sounds like Bernie, but he votes for the Tea Party. And this sensibility is what makes these folks right-wing populists. They hate all things big, big business, big government, and they correctly see the two as conjoined. Culturally, Hochschild reports, they seek, quote, relief from the liberal notions of what they should feel, happy for the gay newlywed, sad for the plight of the Syrian refugee, unresentful about paying taxes. How do the good people of Lake Charles cope if they don't look to government? They have their church. Harold Moreno, mourning his lost cypress trees, tells Hochschild thoughtfully, "They say there are beautiful trees in heaven." They have their sense of decency and self-reliance. They are victims, Hochschild writes, who reject the language of victimhood. She puts her finger on something that a lot of critics and analysts have missed, the role of culture. These folks feel condescended to. After a lot of reading and reporting myself, here's what I conclude about the deeper dynamics of this admittedly strange election. First of all, there's what I call the clash of dueling injuries. Deeply felt injuries of class, of race, of gender, of culture that are turned against one another. African Americans correctly feel that racial justice still eludes them, brutalization continues. Women correctly perceive the continuation of glass ceilings and persistent contempt by a still patriarchal society. LGBT people correctly feel that their revolution is still incomplete and disrespected. Young people correctly feel that their future is being stolen from them. Downwardly mobile white people correctly feel that they are doing far less well than their parents or their grandparents, and that their kids are likely to do worse. One of the books I reviewed was called White Trash, a history going back to colonial times of the white underclass who were not plantation owners or slaveholders, who were one notch above blacks and who were played off by elites against blacks. Try telling an Appalachian white to check your privilege. And instead of all of this injury and hurt and even rage being directed against the one group that floats above it all, the 1% and the corporate elite, this sense of injury gets turned against one another. Trump excels at tapping the rage of white middle class and working class people who feel displaced and dishonored. The direction of the Carter, Clinton, Obama, Clinton Democratic Party in the direction of Wall Street and Hillary's six-figure fees from Goldman Sachs doesn't help. The Democrats embrace cultural liberalism, but not economic populism. The Rainbow Parade on display at the Democratic National Convention epitomizes everything that working class whites hate about liberals. It's a kind of liberal elitism that puts the demands of every other group ahead of the downwardly mobile white working class. Despite the fact that she is in a breakthrough role as the first woman president, which should rouse a lot of excitement and a lot of energy, but she represents continuity and business as usual in a year when the mood of the country is a mood of backlash and resentment. Bernie Sanders, or even better, Elizabeth Warren, would have done a lot better at galvanizing populist rage in a progressive direction. The politics of the South are creeping northward. You can see this in Ohio. Parts of Ohio are becoming more like Appalachia. For decades, analysts have been forecasting that the growth of demographic groups who tend to support Democrats, the well-educated, young, ethnic and racial minorities, portends a progressive majority nation, whistling past Dixie. Presumably Democrats could stop worrying about carrying the South because they didn't need it. And anyway, the South, with the influx of Hispanics and Northerners, was becoming more like the rest of America. But what if the opposite is true? What if the vivid sense of class and cultural hurt is invading the North? Catherine Kramer's book, The Politics of Resentment, which is set in Wisconsin, found views in once progressive Wisconsin that could have come out of the mouths of Hochschild's interviewees in Louisiana. George Wallace, in 1968, was the harbinger of all of this. He did very well at tapping white working class rage in the North, and in several northern states, he won more votes than the margin by which Nixon defeated Humphrey. So as the Southern political economy invades the North, the economy may well be generating more downwardly mobile white people faster than the society is producing more racial and ethnic minorities and well-educated liberals. At best, it's a kind of close contest. And uniting all of the groups against the 1%, against predatory capitalism, will be a long-term challenge. Professor Robert Putnam has written rather pessimistically that the more diverse a society, the more people are likely to be mistrustful of each other. Now, the great counterexample to this, and thank the Lord we have at least one, is California, where probably the most rainbow state in the country now has the most progressive government, where there's a 2/3 working majority in both houses, a progressive governor, repenting the fact that he wasn't so progressive the first time around when he was governor, putting into practice some of the policies, both on the economic front and on the environmental front, that we would support. So at least that demonstrates, and California's economy is bigger than most countries, that it is possible to galvanize a coalition of people on behalf of decent economics, decent environmental policy. But it's not easy. If it were easy, we wouldn't have Trumpism. let me turn to the subject of our conference and try to relate the fraught condition of our politics to the even more momentous challenge of saving the planet. As you've heard, if we don't act decisively, the Earth will not be habitable. But somehow we have to turn those insights into a possible politics. And as much as we'd like to remedy these climate challenges at the local level, at the neighborhood level, by creating a parallel post-capitalist economy, this also requires changes in national policy, which in turn requires a majority politics. At best, these two elements of the green challenge and the green strategy need to be reconciled. We do want to reduce the level of material consumption, both to lessen the toll on the planet and as a value proposition. Less materialism is not just an environmental strategy, it is a necessary shift away from predatory capitalism. We are articulating this shift at a moment when something like 70 to 90% of Americans correctly believe that they have been experiencing downward mobility for the better part of 3 decades. Americans are a can-do people. It's that spirit that we need to tap. You really can't sell freeze in the dark to Americans. We tried that, and it didn't work. Because of all the technological breakthroughs, we need to combine a language of hope and possibility and improvement with a language of alarm. We have to be careful in the language we use so that we don't come across as promoting reduced living standards for people who already experience themselves as having suffered. That's what's attractive about Juliet Shore's word plenitude, but let's recognize that this can be a tricky politics. The Prospect recently published a piece by our friend Chuck Collins called "Can We Make a Living on a Living Planet?" And Chuck spent 3 months in conversations both with deep ecology people and with labor and community organizers trying to square that circle. Chuck recounts in that piece a conversation with Carlos Espinosa Toro, the lead organizer for Jamaica Plain New Economy Transition in Boston. And Collins mentions Richard Heinberg's book, The Party's Over. Quote, "The party's over?" Carlos repeats. "I wasn't even invited to the party. In fact, I've been working at the party and hoping I would get to go to the party someday." And Carlos continues, "As organizers, we think of our work as the art of mobilizing people by raising expectations. People are engaged when there is a possibility of more dignity, more income, better working conditions, a piece of the pie. How do we organize people around the reality that their aspiration for a decent job, retirement community, a new car, a vacation, a better life for their children is less possible? And what if the messengers are mostly privileged people who have been at the party?" Collins responds with rueful irony. "Yeah, it was a great party. Sorry that we affluent white people in the global north ate all the food, drank all the booze, and trashed the house. Sorry it's over. Now it's time for you to sacrifice and tighten your belt." "I sure as hell don't want to be the one to break the news to people," says Carlos. You get the point. We who care about the planet have to come to terms with this. There are ways to reconcile economic opportunity and broader prosperity with sustainability, but it has to produce the promise of real gains for the people who have been losing out. The idea of a just transition, not only for fossil fuel workers, but for all workers who earn too little to live on, even when they work long hours, has to be at the center of our story. If ordinary Americans don't perceive that we appreciate that good, they will dismiss us as utopians or as rich kids inflicting voluntary simplicity on a stressed working class. There are strategies for creating good jobs. Some can be local, some can be national, some involve building a parallel economy, some require government policy. They challenge us to reconcile our ideals about scale and about localism. This raises a second practical conundrum, and that's the issue of large-scale infrastructure investment. We certainly don't want large pork-barrel politics based on top-down planning in the spirit of Robert Mosen with the contracts going to Bechtel. Yet we have a basic shortfall in infrastructure as well as a shortage of funds for the green transition that are going to require a lot of money. I see 4 different tiers of this. One is basic infrastructure. The American Society of Civil Engineers has put the figure at $3.6 trillion. This is not even 21st century stuff. It's basic bridges, roads, water, sewer, stuff that's been left to ruin, subways that were built in the late 19th century that simply have to be modernized. And then we need advanced public investments. 21st century smart grids, you know the whole litany. And then we need to protect our coasts and other areas affected by extreme weather. And then we need a true green transition. I would put the numbers on the low side at something like $1 trillion a year for 10 years. You've heard other numbers as high as 60 trillion. And to put this in perspective, World War II, which is the great example of a national mobilization, spent between 1/4 and 1/3 of GDP for 4 years. $1 trillion a year today would be about 5 to 6% of GDP. So World War II spent 4 or 5 times that, and it stimulated 2 generations of technological advance. It pushed us from 12% unemployment to full employment within less than a year. Some of it was tax supported, some of it was debt supported, and of course it stimulated so much economic activity that the debt was soon paid off. This raises another circle that we have to square. We don't want GDP growth as conventionally defined. On the other hand, we don't want the economy performing below its potential, but we want that potential to be a green potential so that the balance of work and leisure and decent jobs for people can be realized. Interest rates are at their lowest since World War II. Government could borrow a lot of the money. And this also raises some very tricky questions for our movement. What kinds of jobs will be created? What kind of planning will there be? What kind of mix of local engagement and federal involvement will there be? What is political realism in this context? There are so many things we can do, such as divest and invest, that don't require much from government, but we do need some things from government at all levels of government. If Hillary Clinton is the next president, she should be talking about a just transition in ways that would resonate in this region. In Ohio and Pennsylvania and Kentucky and West Virginia, where too many people sound like the folks who conclude that their lives would be better by voting for Trump. We also need to get practical about the whole ideal of a better mix of work and leisure. 40 years ago, the Nobel Prize-winning economist Vasily Leontief liked to tell a parable about the day coming when the economy would become so productive there would be one human worker and her job would be to flip the switch. Leontief then said that at that point the entire question becomes distributive. Who owns the fruits of all of that productivity, and what does everybody else do for a living? One answer, it seems to me, is the answer proposed by Peter Barnes, that if the society as a whole is generating all of this productivity, we all get a piece of it. A non-fossil fuel version of the Alaska Permanent Fund, where if you get a check every year that is your share of all the productivity generated by the new technology, then you don't have to work so many hours, then you have more time for leisure, then you can live decently. That's a much better version of the sharing economy, to me anyway, than Uber. The problem is that a lot of people who don't have our privileges get the low end of the sharing economy. One of my mentors, Professor Galbraith, used to say, you always have to say in conclusion to give the audience hope. A lot of this has to be both and. Both the social movement of the sort that Bill McKibben talked about and success in electoral politics, both less carbon and more sustainable prosperity broadly shared, both a parallel economy and takeover of the mainstream economy, both a national push for publicly supported public infrastructure and a shift in private investment. All of this has to be anchored in democratic politics, because if not, the transition is likely to be top-down. While it is immensely useful to describe aspirationally the economy and the society that we want, recognizing that what seems to be utopian is sheer realism if we want to save our planet. We also need to be pragmatists and be persuasive to the kind of people who are voting for Donald Trump. And when we go back to Lake Charles, Louisiana in a decade, the people whose lives and homes are being destroyed by chemical companies, who see self-reliance linked to the Tea Party, and when we go back to West Virginia, if we do our job right, those good people will be voting for us.
What I think that is occurring in the southern part of the United States is a separation, isolation, that we don't have the knowledge of what's really going on in environmental areas. There's just a lot of ignorance. I live there. I have lots of intelligent, educated friends who don't know about environmental issues, who live in a circle of climate denial, and it just rubs off on them. That's how they feel. That's why I started Birthday Texas. The tack that we've taken, and this movement that we have, is to bring environmental groups by the scores, by the dozens, to once a year conference and exposition. Universities and corporations to whom people in Texas will listen to the most, and government agencies, to have a really vibrant and strong review of issues. But even then, it's touchy with how we address global warming. We've had this event for 6 years, and we have 800 exhibiting organizations, 130,000 people. But as this Earth Day of Texas that is representative of the inclusion and trying to bring in general public and corporations and business people, we usually tippy-toe around the issue of global warming and leave it to the environmental groups and the universities who are there enforced to do that. That we need more exposure. We created a venue for that, for the rest of America to come down to this South and make their opinions known. I've been a Republican all my life. I grew up that way. And a long time ago, the idea of a liberal Republican was not an unusual idea. Now, the Republicans, the leaders, the politicians, and the contributors like myself really focus on congressional races. Don't speak out in favor of Donald Trump.
We've had some great examples of what's happening at the local level and what can happen at the state level in terms of meeting the needs of the moment. Is our national political structure up to the demand of the moment? How power is exercised, and how that partisanship is reinforced at the federal and national level, can it meet the needs that we have before us? Comparably in ways that the local and state government meets those needs, or can meet those needs?
No, I don't think it can, and I think that's why the policies that we need, the whole parallel economy that we need, has to bubble up from the local level, but it can't stay at the local level. Eventually, it has to change national policy, because the national government simply has too much power. It simply has to set the rules, and it simply has access to too many resources to just give up on it. So again, it's another one of these both ends. We have to demonstrate what's possible at the local level, which is hard. It's hard to get scale. When you have a parallel economy that's generating hundreds of jobs, that may be very impressive and very important in a neighborhood and even in a city, but is it enough to persuade large numbers of voters that our vision is one that is actually going to be helpful in their lives? You have to chain yourself to the White House wall some of the time. But on the other hand, you have to be able to sit down with these people and change policy. And on the third hand, you have to win elections so that you can elect people to office who can change it.
If the question becomes the overweening sort of power, right, at the federal level, and the need to, I guess, sort of divest some of that power to the local level, it seems that that's a program that a conservative perspective could very easily get on board with in terms of support for this new economy.
The Republicans have been extremely hypocritical lately on the issue of local control. We ran a piece called Blue Cities, Red States, where all of these cities, like the Austins and the Charlottes, are coming up with these great local policies, and then the Republican legislature, the Republican governor says, whoops, you can't do that, we're going to preempt that. The Republicans in Congress use federal preemption when that's convenient and use states' rights when that's convenient. Ideology and corporatism at this point trumps what used to be principle. That in principle, they're for local control except when they aren't, except when it's more convenient to rig the rules in favor of corporations, then they're in favor of federal preemption. It would be great to appeal to what used to be their principles, but as Trammell said, there are not enough old-fashioned principled Republicans out there, and we need more of them.
We've heard a lot of analogies to World War II, which was certainly had bipartisan support eventually. I think we all agree that if there is a Pearl Harbor moment, it will be much, much too late. How do you bring everyone along prior to that Pearl Harbor moment?
If you know the answer to that, see me after class. Some of the public-private stuff, the divest and invest, effort to use private money and public money to leverage green bonds, that gets you part of the way. It takes both leadership and it takes a movement. It will take a president of the United States to turn this into a kind of slow-moving Pearl Harbor moment where the future of our children and grandchildren on the planet is at stake, and a movement really pounding on the national government to change the dynamics of what's politically possible and get some serious money into infrastructure. If the Federal Reserve had more nerve, the Fed could announce, in the same way that it came up with $3 trillion to bail out the banks, that it was going to put $3 trillion available to buy infrastructure, to buy local green infrastructure bonds. The Fed actually could do that. The Fed demonstrated in the financial crisis that it can do anything it wants to. With money at 2%, that would be long-term cheap money. In World War II, the annual deficit was about 25% of GDP a year, and you would say, wow, interest rates must have gone through the roof. Well, interest rates were 2% throughout the war because the Fed and the Treasury simply made an agreement that the Fed would create enough money to buy all of the bonds that the Treasury created. We could do that. So it takes leadership and it takes a movement.
We are so far behind in supplying people that know how to think cognitively that everyone's plan is conservative, okay, and liberal, to include everyone, all the bottom feeders and upward mobility, simply can't happen. I'm a small contractor. I've experienced it for 30 years. It's getting worse and worse relative to states' rights. Everyone has a better idea of how to rear their children. I'd like an answer on how the United States of America is going to become a leader again in education.
I'm very skeptical that we're going to do it with vouchers and charters, for-profit organizations that promise experimentation and end up bashing teachers and siphoning off money from public institutions. So I would start by giving public institutions the resources that they needed.
We've heard World War II as an analogy, we've heard moonshot as an analogy, we've heard civil rights movements and marching as an analogy. Are any of those adequate, or is a new paradigm or new narrative needed?
Global climate change is like nothing else we've ever confronted. And so you grope for analogies, not grope in the Donald Trump sense, but when the United States of America has come together around a noble common purpose that brought out the best in people and that required some sacrifice, but that married the sacrifice to something aspirational that promised a better life for people. Yeah, the Civil Rights Movement was a time when we began to attain some of that. World War II is doubly tricky as an analogy to what we need to do to save the planet because it was very top-down. And we need the federal resources, but we need the federal resources to underwrite what is mostly a bottom-up movement.
If we can put the Trump phenomenon down to a failure of education in the United States, and I've heard that a lot lately. But Trammell, you have been holding a Earth Day event in Dallas, Texas, which is the heart of one of the bastions of conservative thought and, I dare say, fossil fuel wealth. Is there a way you see the education of the Deep South attorney on this issue of climate and renewable energy and sustainability.
If I were talking about a Pearl Harbor moment, I'd say it's the moment for you to get out of your comfortable chairs and come down and deal with our issues and educate us.
Sounds like a Mississippi summer moment.
A lot of the Trump voters may be ignorant, but they're not stupid. They may be misinformed, but they know that something is destroying their livelihoods and something has diminished their horizons and the horizons of their kids. They don't trust government. They believe in local self-reliance. We need to pivot that on its own axis so that our version of self-reliance and their version of self-reliance becomes the same vision. It's about offering people a better life in a fashion that is environmentally sustainable. And squaring that circle, I think, will determine whether we really become a majority movement or whether we remain a movement of an enlightened minority whose grandchildren 50 years from now can look back and say, boy, my grandparents were absolutely right about this. It's too bad they lost and the planet is not habitable. That would not be a good outcome. We need to not just be right, we need to win.
Going local, and I bring to the stage for introductions my friend, ally, and comrade, Dr. Cindy France of Psychology here at Oberlin College.
One of the themes we've heard over and over again at this conference is that we can't count on solutions that come from the national level, that we really have to act at the local level, and most exciting, that action from the local level can be tremendously successful. The next speakers who will be talking about creating change at the local level, and they are all doing that. Michael Schumann is an economist, attorney, author, and entrepreneur. He's a founding board member of the Business Alliance for Local Living Economies, and the author of 9 books, including The Local Economy Solution, How Innovative Self-Financing Pollinator Enterprises Can Grow Jobs and Prosperity. How Local Businesses Are Beating the Global Competition, received a bronze prize from the Independent Publishers Association for Best Business Book, 2006.
Many of us received a call to action about climate change and a bunch of other environmental issues a generation ago. And the Rutland Commission articulated a definition of sustainability, basically saying that sustainability is meeting the needs of the current generation without sacrificing the ability to meet the needs of a future generation. We know that was inadequate because it had no articulation of the importance of place. A much better articulation, I think, is sustainability is meeting the needs of your community, present and future, without impairing the ability to meet the needs of other communities. And when you put place in there, you realize that localization is an essential piece of solving almost all the environmental issues that we face. In fact, most people 25 years ago pretty much scoffed at the idea that localization would have any traction at all. But here's the good news. We won. We have won the arguments around localization. For example, this appeared in the Harvard Business Review in the summer of 2010. More small firms means more jobs. It's a regression analysis of regions across the United States and shows that those communities with the highest density of locally owned businesses have the highest per capita job growth rate. This study from the Federal Reserve in 2013 shows that those communities with the highest density of locally owned business have the highest per capita income growth rate. In other words, if you're interested in equality and bringing down levels of poverty, local businesses and local self-reliance is the way to do so. Now, many of us think, well, local businesses may be good, but are they profitable? Should we invest in them? We have great data on profitability of businesses from Canada, our not very dissimilar neighbor to the north, and it turns out that the most profitable businesses in Canada have 10 to 20 employees. The least profitable businesses are those with over 500 employees, that is, those that are traded on the Toronto Stock Exchange. Go figure. Suppose it were the case that localization was essential for dealing with climate change, but they weren't profitable and they weren't good for the economy in other ways. We would have a real difficult task ahead of us. But all of the arguments are in our favor. And that's my point. We have discovered this wonderful coincidence of data and what we need to happen at the local level. And we have focused on both end national and local policy. So take, for example, the Jobs Act that President Obama signed in 2012, pushed by localizers, working actually arm in arm with Tea Party Republicans, that made it easier for grassroots people to put money in locally owned business. And we did this not just at the national level, but at the local level, where more than 30 states have reformed their securities laws to make it easier for us to invest in locally owned business. Which is localization is a movement that is occurring everywhere on the planet, in countries rich and poor, big and small. I was just at a conference on localization in Florence last Sunday. This is a picture of the audience, 1,000 people gathered in the Green Hall in Florence to discuss localization. And the leaders of the localization movement there are the leaders of the most successful new political party in Italy, the Five Star Movement. We need to totally reconstruct economic development. I have the picture of the clown there, because I was in Sarasota, home of the Ringling Brothers Circus, 2 years ago. Someone dropped a newspaper in front of me about local food week, and there was this article that said that the Economic Development Commission, 12 people in all, had done nothing over the previous year except try to attract a Danish pharmaceutical company called Xelium. They had put together a package of $137 million of public money. How many jobs do you think that would get you? Several thousand? Actually, it was 191, and almost all of them would be people who have the jobs already moving to Sarasota. This works out to $717,000 per job, and is mad. It is a mad way of doing economic development. Let's compare an alternative. The guy on the right is a guy named Lou Stein. He's a grassroots economic developer who worked in Appalachian, West Virginia for 5 years, and he created 300 to 500 jobs per year at $500 per job. How did he do it? He rolled up his sleeves and said, I'm going to help work with you on business plans and connect you with financial institutions. And he went to existing businesses and asked them a question that the existing economic development department never asked them, which was, how can I help? So we've got to replace attract and retain economic development with grassroots, localizing, self-reliance economic development. We have to take this local investment revolution further. It is one thing to change national and state law around local investment. It's another thing to get people to take advantage of it. I have the picture here of my friend Amy Pearl in Oregon, who once a week gets in her car and travels into rural Oregon to teach businesses and investors how to take advantage of Oregon's reformed law. We need a lot more of that. Nova Scotia allows grassroots groups to create pension fund investments, and in fact you get a tax credit if you put money into these grassroots investments funds. This woman runs a fund called FarmWorks that invests in local farm businesses and local food businesses. In Alberta, you can put money into local investment cooperatives, which also support communities with grassroots businesses. In New Brunswick, last year, they passed a local investment tax credit. If you decide to invest more than $1,000 in a locally owned business in New Brunswick, you get a 50% tax credit off your provincial taxes. This is huge. in mobilizing people to start putting their money into locally owned business. Here's another example of both ends. We need grassroots initiatives, and we need a framework at both the national and the local level. Now, I believe that one of the ways that we tiptoe past Republican opposition is to propose public policies that cost little or nothing. Moving your city's money from Bank Asor of America into a local bank or credit union. If you think it's expensive or impossible, look to the home of Barry Goldwater, Phoenix, Arizona, which has moved their banking to local banks there. Local procurement. We don't need across the board little preferences, 5%, 10% for local businesses. What we need to do is we need to ask bidders for government contracts what percentage of the contract is being spent locally. Calculate the tax benefits and adjust the contract accordingly. That's what this guy, the telegenic 30-something premier of New Brunswick, Brian Gallant, is doing. It is a brilliant and legal way of rebooting procurement policy and making sure we get more efficient procurement that is more localized. Finally, I think we need to think about how more economic development can be done at the grassroots. There are 1,000+ incubators in North America. Almost all of them depend on annual allocations from government agencies, from foundations. This is a bad way of constructing entrepreneurship programs, because when we head into crisis, these programs get cut at the moment you most need them. So an example of a self-financing program is run by this guy, Michael Looney Lives in Seattle, called Fledge. Fledge incubates businesses, and at the end of the incubation, it takes a 5% equity stake. Now, if he was a venture capitalist, he would take a 99% venture stake and fire the entrepreneur. 5% is reasonable, and he then gives the company the ability to buy back that stake over the following year or two and reobtain full ownership. But this is a way of financing in perpetuity long-term incubation. Probably a dumb way of doing buy local programs is getting the government to give you $100,000 for a big media buy around buy local. A smarter way is to hire these guys, Katrina and Michael Carlo Descato, who run a loyalty card called Supportment in Portland, Oregon, now rebranded as Placemaker. Every time you use this card at a local business, you get credits at other local businesses. There are 80,000 businesses in Portland, Oregon that now use this card. And this is such a successful private mechanism promoting local purchasing, it is spreading to a half dozen other communities in the western United States. Where I want to leave you is with this scene from Indiana Jones in The Last Crusade. And where you may remember that after Indiana has suffered through snakes and spiders and terrorists, he comes to this crypt. And in this crypt, there's the Holy Grail, and there's this guy, the 500-year-old guardian, and he says, Indiana, you have one final task. There are 50 goblets here. Choose the goblet from which Christ drank, and choose wisely. Well, this guy jumps to the front, the German spy, and says, I know which one Christ would have drunk from. It would have been the most ornate. He drinks from it, and he spontaneously combusts. At which point the guardian says, he chose poorly. We're choosing poorly by not buying local enough. We're certainly not investing local enough, and we're not focused on the state and national policies that are essential for localization. What we need is not to occupy Wall Street and the existing institutions. We just need to replace them. Thank you.